Okay, greetings. Let's go ahead and spend a few minutes on Chapter 3, Victims and Victimization. I think the first thing I want to point out is that the National Crime Victimization Survey provides us a lot of information about the impact of crime. For example, the economic costs. But also, we need to take a look at the emotional costs. For example, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a mental disorder and anxiety disorder, and this can occur after experiencing a traumatic event or witnessing a traumatic event, or having a loved one, a friend or family member, for example, have a traumatic event occur. And post-traumatic stress disorder can occur years after and affect someone years after the actual event, with flashbacks, nightmares, depression, anxiety, self-destructive behaviors, and so on. Also, crime may lead to increased fear and suspicions, and this can lead to interaction problems. We also see that there's a cycle of violence. For example, boys and girls are more likely to engage in violent behavior if they're the target or experience some type of abuse, physical abuse, for example, or were exposed to violence. And even though the risk is relatively small, it seems to be equal, according to your author, for boys and girls, or males and females in that regard. Also, there's the social ecology of crime, where we look at, or of victimization, I should say, where we look at, for example, patterns of victimization and neighborhoods and households, and we find that some groups are more vulnerable to crime than others. For example, those living in urban and western states, and specifically by race African Americans, are more vulnerable to crime victimization. A lot of this probably has to do with socioeconomic status, basically income, social class, if you will. Also, gender can be another factor related to victimization. For example, if we exclude rape and sexual assault, males are more likely than females to be victims of violent crime. And interestingly enough, when we look at those that are victims by gender, we find that females are more likely to be victimized by a person that they know, while males are more likely to be victimized by a stranger. Also, we notice, looking at age, that younger groups have greater victimization risk, and elderly victims have decreased victimization risk for many crimes, although are more likely to experience, for example, fraud and scams, which criminals may target the elderly for those types of crimes. I mentioned social status. Lower socioeconomic status is associated with victimization. With terms of marital status, that we find that those that have never been married are victimized more than those that are married, and we find that widows and widowers have the lowest victimization risk. And so we begin to see these patterns emerge on risk factors related to victimization. A lot of variation can be explained by region, socioeconomic status, race and ethnicity, gender, age, income, and so on. We also see that those that have been crime victims have a higher chance of future victimization, and that may relate to the living environment and social ecology of the individuals or the groups. And we see that also, looking at the nature of victimization, that often, or at least in around a third of the cases, substance abuse, drugs or alcohol, are involved in violent crimes. There's a clear association there, a link. I'm not saying that drugs and alcohol cause violent crime, but I'm saying that that they often go hand in hand, at least a third of the cases. And we can also begin to look at some of the theories of victimization. For example, victim precipitation theory focuses on the idea that a person may get in a conflict with another, and that may lead to that person's injury or death. You know, the case here would be, for example, if someone's walking down the street in Park Avenue in Winter Park, Florida, and bumps into someone, and instead of saying excuse me, calls them a bad evil person and curses them out, and then the other person throws them through a window of a nice dress shop store, that would be perhaps considered victim precipitation theory. Also, there's lifestyle theory, where we look at the actual lifestyle or activities and the times of day or night, and whether or not alcohol and drugs or substances are used, and the locations people hang out. There's also deviant place theory, that, in other words, there's some places that are well known to be dangerous places. Obviously, where drug trade occurs, usually is associated with higher crimes. Interestingly enough, looking at the research, topless dance clubs are not associated with higher crime rates in the area, even though there's been some debate on this topic. The research again shows that this is not the case. Routine activities theory is one of the theories that begins to look at some preventive techniques as well. And with routine activity theory, we look at the availability of suitable targets, the absence of capable guardians, and the presence of a motivated offender. So we look at the interactions of these factors, in other words, and in our research on child abuse, we look at if risk of victimization for child abuse is decreased if there's less availability of suitable targets among offenders, and there's also capable guardians who can protect the children. Also, routine activities theory may look at hotspots, which are places where people engaged in criminal activity may congregate. And then we can look at some of the government response to crime and victimization in this case, and some of the task forces that have been put together, and different witness protection laws, victims compensation programs, for example, and you'll see this in your textbook. And also community organization, how communities may organize to fight crime at the neighborhood or community level. And also features such as the more recent development of offender registrations, for example, sex offender registries. We see this occurring as well. So there's really a wealth of information in your textbook, and I've just kind of scanned over the more basic themes and patterns, but you really would get a better idea looking at the details, and you begin to see some patterns and themes emerge. And I think that's what's helpful. Instead of trying to memorize all this, think about patterns and themes emerging, and explanations, and how everything fits together or how it doesn't, and where some questions are answered, and of course where questions are unanswered. And this wraps up this video. Good day.